Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, flanked by a number of other Democratic senators, calling for additional transparency surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case. As the Senate Minority Leader put it, Trump could have been transparent. However, he chose to hide, as he stated, with regard to Jeffrey Epstein. They now plan to evoke federal law to make sure there is transparency. In doing so, they hope to make the Justice Department produce files. Only the Homeland Security Committee can do that, and that's exactly what they plan to do. As they stated, the force of law will truly come to light. Joining us now to discuss all of this and so much more is Madeline Somerville, jury consultant and national trial attorney, back here on the Live Zone. Madeline, always good to see you. Thank you so much for being patient.
Good to see you too, Guy. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so we just heard what the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say. They are now, in essence, making sure that the Justice Department will produce the files. I did not know, but only the Homeland Security Committee can do just that. I'm hoping from a legal perspective, because they also stated this can be challenged in the courts. What exactly are they making reference to, and how will this unfold?
The Homeland Security purview is pretty wide. And if the folks who sit on that committee want to be able to obtain documents or get testimony from somebody, their subpoena power is pretty powerful. However, there are checks on that would allow whatever request they send to be checked by a judge. But I think the checks and balances here is really the important part. So what they said was, we are using our plenary power, our power that was given to us by the Constitution, to check the president. And that is how it works, right? Some people think that the president of the United States is the head of all the branches, right? The executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And that's not true. The Supreme Court is the head of the judiciary branch, right? And there's the president of the Senate as well. So his authority does not extend to all the different branches. And so what Chuck Schumer just said, Senator Chuck Schumer, is we are exercising the power that we have to be able to request those documents. And that power is pretty large, but again, can still be checked by the judiciary.
All right, let's move on to the Department of Justice that we now know in late night court filings gave federal judges additional information as part of its efforts to get grand jury proceedings related to notorious sex offenders. Of course, I'm making reference to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislane Maxwell unsealed. Maxwell wants immunity if she testifies. The question is, this will happen? And we could really break down check by check what she's asking for.
The issue here, I think, is actually more of a political one than a legal one. And as a strategist, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, what's going to be the major problem for President Trump if he decides to grant her any sort of immunity or commute her sentence in some way? Because it's not all or nothing, right? He could reduce it. And the issue here ends up being that the part of his base that's challenged him is frustrated because they feel like there's a two-tiered justice system. They feel like there's no justice if people at the top commit crimes, if they do something wrong. And so giving her immunity when she's somebody who is at the top, I think would frustrate his base even more. So if he does do that, it's almost impossible for me to think that that's not being done on purpose. There's not some motive behind that's separate and apart from everything that we're seeing here. But legally, right, from a legal perspective, if you're looking at all of the reasons why she would want immunity, right, or why he would give it, she could show up at the hearing and plead the fifth. She has to show up because she's been subpoenaed, but she could show up and plead the fifth. And so in order to avoid that, they're going to try to offer the carrot a little bit to see what they can get done.
So, Madeline, one of the things that she's stating that would have to happen in order for her to move forward would be that the interview cannot happen at the correctional facility where she's serving her sentence. I'm going to ask you why. My initial thought happens to be it's all about the optics. You don't want to have, let's say, bars, what have you, behind you as you go about to testify during this hearing. Am I correct?
For sure. It's definitely about the optics, always. And that usually it works for Trump, too, because he's a guy who's all about the optics and the message that it sends. If they want her testimony to be taken seriously and credibly, it's very difficult to process it that way when you're behind bars. Besides that, she just wants to get out, right? If I were her in that situation, or heaven forbid. But if I were her in that situation, I would want to get out too. So you're really just trying to get every piece of leeway that you could possibly be granted. But it's also about credibility.
She also stated that she would want the questions in advance and, quote, surprise questioning would be both inappropriate and unproductive. Yet again, it appears of not necessarily stacking the deck, but making sure she's well versed with regard to what she would have to address.
Yeah, so I actually agree with that piece, and here's why. Because if she shows up to a congressional hearing and she starts talking and then they say, okay, well, tell me more about that. And she could say, I'm not prepared to answer that question. If she knows what the questions are ahead of time, then she can't claim I'm not prepared to answer that question. So it actually ends up working out in the government's favor to let her know what to expect in the hearing, because then she can't just say, you know what, I didn't look at the files that I needed to, or I hadn't thought about that. You have to have made those efforts prior to coming in, and that you have no excuse not to.
Yet again, Democrats now calling for the Justice Department to produce files with regard to only the Homeland Security Committee actually having the power to do so. And we'll see how that will unfold over the next several days and or weeks. Madeline, while I have you here, I want to address a number of other legal issues, if you will, surrounding politics. And this one could be viewed as being somewhat light, but, well, if you happen to be a fan of Beyonce, that's not the case. President Trump now calling for former Vice President Kamala Harris and the celebrities who endorsed her presidential candidacy to be prosecuted, that including Beyonce, Al Sharpton, and Oprah. A number of critics and legal analysts have come forward and saying that he doesn't have a leg to stand on. What's your take on this?
He does not have a leg to stand on. I have done some research a little bit into this topic, and it looks like the money that exchanged hands here, which was supposed to have been a problem, right? Because they shouldn't have used campaign funds to pay for this endorsement. It was actually just to pay her people for the production for the show that they were putting on. That's completely legal. It's backed up by all the documents. He does not have a leg to stand on when it comes to any of those claims. Now, to me, what I think is going on here, remember how we talked a minute ago about his supporters being frustrated that there's a two-tier justice system,
Sure.
and they want to see justice for the people at the top, or against the people at the top. I think that this is an effort to quell those feelings amongst his base, and who's bigger than Beyonce and Oprah. So if he's trying to get accountability from, even though I, as a lawyer, don't believe they've done anything wrong, if he's trying to get accountability from people at the top to try to satiate his base, I think this is a way to do it.
All right, we'll end this segment with this, and that happens to be the president. We're now getting word, possibly, maybe, could it be, well, could very well look at pardoning the music mogul known as Sean P. Diddy Combs, while the rapper awaits his sentence in October. Now, the presidential pardon, correct me if I'm wrong, Madeline, would let him walk free from imprisonment immediately. Is that the case?
Yeah, it is the case. And Guy, I know you and I stuck together through the whole trial. We talked about it quite a lot, and I think that, again, this would be a major misstep on President Trump's part if he were to do this. Again, his base wants people at the top who've done things wrong to be held accountable. And so if he does do that, I think he's going to frustrate his base even more. He does have the power to be able to do it, and that is a talking point that he can keep putting out there. If Diddy is in his corner, right, and perhaps it's because he's trying to rally people behind him who are powerful, who might be able to do some good for him. But at this point, I think the people that are in his corner need to see justice happen in terms of people who commit crimes at the top. And I don't think anything but that is going to satiate the base.
Yeah. Madeline, just a zinger really quick. Obviously, we have seen the president wield his power, if you will, with regard to pardons. I can guarantee you there are some now stating they don't want this to ever happen again, meaning someone, just one individual, to have that power. Is that a possibility? Could we somehow, some way, some form, some fashion have lawmakers and or legislation come forth so that the president no longer has the power to provide pardons?
I guess so. I think I would have to do another brush up on my constitutional law. Technically, right, we've got lots of amendments to the Constitution. Who's to say that we can't add another one? I think that that's possible. But again, actually, this goes full circle back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is checks and balances. I think the issue here is perhaps the executive branch has too much power. Perhaps it overrides the will of the people in some ways. And actually, Thomas, little side history note, Thomas Jefferson actually said that the Constitution should be revamped every 19 years.
Wow.
So it's just something interesting for your viewers to think about. I know I often give them history lessons.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, that's one history lesson a lot of folks will continue to mull over. But yet again, we have been speaking with Madeleine Somerville, trial attorney extraordinaire, kind enough to join us right here on the Live Zone. Truly appreciate your time, Madeleine.
Thanks so much, guys. See you soon.